Hey, this is a supercut of every single pirate weapon that I have ever covered, which is all of them. So, a couple of notes. Some of these videos are pretty old, like the Spyglass dating back to 2019, and the old Betsy was covered in the same video because they're the same weapon, as you'll find out very soon if you didn't know already. And then some of these are quite a bit of ways. So, yeah, there's not much to say here. Every single weapon in the pirate set is in here. If you guys have seen all of these videos before, you do not need to watch this, but if you'd like them all, in order, here you are, right place. And if you want to skip ahead, there will be timestamps and links to these videos individually down in the description below for your leisure. And without further ado, let's begin. Ta-da! I finally got a Bundlebuss schematic, so I can actually talk about it. So, the other day, these birthday llamas came out, and they brought with it a whole host of different weapons. I'm going to show a picture on the screen right now that I haven't double-checked, but Ben sent this in our Discord. That is, to my knowledge, what they released with the birthday llamas, which was way more than we expected, and I'm so excited about it. Just to distract from the Bundlebuss for a second, I'm going to talk about how they released some of the best weapons in the game. They re-released the Spectral Blade, which we didn't think would happen because it was a quest item, but it came back anyway. We thought the birthday llamas would only release weapons that were in llamas previously, but that managed to not be the case. So the Santa's Little Helper also came back, which was like a top-tier rocket. If you don't have this, then you're missing out, and you should go open some more llamas. The Pain Train came back, which was a shop item. Again, I wasn't expecting that, but hey, they brought back the Typewriter 2, a lot of classics that I didn't see coming, and I'm very excited about that. One of which was the Bundlebuss. And to start off, I'm going to try to quell a rumor that I hear a lot, and that's that this is a top-tier best weapon in the game. It was for a while. It was absolutely the hardest hitting AR in the game in burst. So I wouldn't say this was like the best AR in the game because it's kind of a burst weapon with a long downtime, and you can only really shorten that with rapid fire, which isn't a perk available to us, I don't believe. And it was very, very, very good for high level missions, taking down mist monsters. We used this in Frost Night when we got the banner here. So it was very, very useful, but it was banking heavily on this 6th perk where every 5 shots it explodes, dealing 70% of your damage. That was doing way more than 70% of your hit. In fact, even if your hits were doing like 90 to 100k, I would get that explosion bonus of like 100 to 200,000. So that 6th perk was really carrying a lot of extra weight, and that made it much, much more powerful. And you also saw this nerf on the Mercury LMG. If you're wondering why my mag perks are like this, just check out the video link below. It's pretty amazing. You can configure a setup to shoot for over 2 minutes straight with that thing. But the Mercury LMG, and kind of why I neutered my schematic here, also got hit hard with that 6th perk nerf, and it just kind of... That 6th perk is what made the Mercury LMG like a pretty B tier weapon to like an A or S tier weapon, because when you laid into a mini boss or a mist monster, that 6th perk did so much extra damage that it bridged the gap from being a bad weapon to an amazing weapon. And once that got nerfed, or i.e. more like fixed because it was bugged, it just really took it with it. Now, all of that being said, the Bundlebuss is still a fantastic weapon. I don't know if it's the go-to endurance weapon to take down the hard stuff, but it's not a bad choice. It's definitely very good, and today we're going to be talking about the best perks. And now that you've been staring at them for a while, you guys can click away. Thanks for hanging out. No, we're going to talk about exactly why I've got it perked this way. So it hits so hard because it's got a base 36 damage, the Bundlebuss does, and you really want that crit chance. It shoots in bursts of 8, so with every single burst you have a chance to do a crap ton of damage, and I would say that this is probably a weapon to be spared for the higher level stuff. You're not really using the Bundlebuss as your main AR. You're not crowd clearing with this thing. You're not wasting bullets on a mini guy, because like I said, it shoots 8 shots, which is really bad for durability if you're only trying to like I mentioned, kill a little baby zombie. You don't want to waste a whole 8 bullets on a zombie that only needs 2 or 3. So the Bundlebuss is kind of the weapon you'd use in conjunction with something like the Pain Train, which is a video coming out tomorrow, or like the Silent Spectre or the Hamlet. Just literally any AR you guys like. I don't care. It doesn't matter. My point is, this thing is something that I used to compare to the Spyglass. That's another video coming out this week, if I can actually go and hunt it down. Spyglass and Old Betsy are kind of the same weapon. I'm a Spyglass kind of guy. But I use my Spyglass to one-shot Mist monsters, which it is very capable of doing in zones under 100. And the Bundlebuss was being compared to it because it too was capable of one bursting a Mist monster. But it's not exactly your main AR, and that's something I'll get into in a little bit later on. So double crit damage is pretty much the meta. That's what everybody does. I'm a person who's usually on the fence about crit builds, but in this case, I think it's just the way to go. Now, it could be considered to do damage or something just to level out the overall damage, so you're not relying on crits. But when you're firing in bursts of 8, it's pretty unlikely that you're not going to crit at least a couple of times, and that usually does plenty of damage to carry that. So reload speed is definitely the way to go because, you know, I mean, stability isn't really... I mean, it kicks pretty hard, but if you just pull down on your mouse, you can counter that pretty well. If you play on controller, stability might be something you want to consider. And durability is like, come on, don't be that guy. Just go farm some Sunbeam, all right? All right, it's cool, don't worry. Oh, and you don't want to go Bright Core on this. For pretty much every weapon in the game, you want to go Sunbeam. There are some caveats, but in this case, Sunbeam is absolutely the way you want to go. And then, of course, the same thing I always say about elementals is if you have 3 schematics like your boy, and you got really, really, really lucky like your boy, and you got fire and water, then nature is definitely what this one's going to be. But if you've only got one of these, energy is a fantastic choice. And now I'm just going to kind of talk about loadouts. So I kind of ruined it, actually. I'm going to link my soldier loadout below. That'll give you a lot of information that I'm not going to be giving in this video today. But I have this first shot Rio build because of something I was going to talk about second. But I usually run Rescue Trooper as my lead for the 50% damage buff. That's on par with the assault crit damage. I'll put the math on screen now for anybody who wants to fight me on it. And if you'd like to fight me on it, contact me on Discord. Don't do it in the comments. It's a lot easier to do it on Discord when we can send pictures. They're effectively the same bonus. So I like to run Rescue Trooper as my lead. It's a preference thing, and I do believe assault crit damage tends to do more in the support anyway. Every time I've ran the numbers, it's about 10% better. And then I like to run, just to talk here about this guy, the assault ammo recovery is kind of just fantastic. I always recommend him in the support. But for this loadout, I want to talk about first shot Rio because she uniquely buffs the Bundlebuss in the best way possible. For the next 6 shots after a reload, your bullets have a 100% chance to crit. So 6 out of those 8 shots have a 100% crit damage, or a crit chance, I should say. So if you're okay with reloading after every single shot, this loadout is overkill for anything but the hardest zones. So I'll show some footage on screen now of me taking out a smasher. It didn't do as much as I hoped. In a bigger party, I would have gotten the boost, which would have done a lot more damage, but it's a very interesting loadout. If you're okay with maximum damage and kind of a clunky playstyle, this is a great way to go about things. But having to reload constantly to get your boost, that is kind of not my personal preference, but something that was definitely worth showing. And of course, you need Sledgehammer somewhere on this team. When you have a 100% crit chance, you need to have a crit damage perk on your team, okay? This dude is a must. I opted for Rescue Trooper for the assault damage being 17%. Of course, you guys can do whatever you want. It's up to you. You can run the assault ammo recovery, save some bullets, you know? Maybe you want, I don't know, whatever you want, you know? Check out the soldier video if you guys want all the options. Editing Beast flying in with some sick tips. Something I forgot to mention in this video, but came up in a conversation after I was working on this, was that you can dual wield a Bundlebuss. So if you're willing to carry 2 of these inside of your hotbar, you can switch between the Bundlebusses back and forth and kind of negate that shoot delay. It wouldn't work incredibly well with Rio because you'd have to reload both of them constantly anyway, but for like a normal kind of soldier loadout where you're always getting that damage buff, not a bad way to go about it. Not my personal playstyle, but definitely something you might want to think about. But that is why I mentioned that I was going to explain why I have reload on here, because if you're running a Rio loadout and your crit bonus is coming from reloads, you want the reload perk for very obvious reasons. So that's about it. A lot longer of a video than I intended this to be, but for a weapon as interesting as the Bundlebuss, you definitely want to cover all the bases. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and thanks for watching. Oh boy. It's the old king of taking down Mist monsters. This was the very first weapon I ever really discovered kind of on my own that was as powerful as this is. So I don't know if this happens to every Save the World player, but I mean, everybody takes advice from other players and they kind of learn along as they go, etc., etc. But this weapon, it was kind of Cthulhu and we were tinkering with different weapons, and we were like, hey, is the Spyglass any good? And then he started leveling it up, and then I started leveling it up, and we were like, whoa, this is really, really good. And this is before we'd ever heard about the Bundlebuss or anything that was really prominent and effective at taking down Mist monsters. This weapon stood out alone as just a powerhouse. So today we're going to be talking about the Spyglass, and I have been wanting to talk about this for months. We discovered this in late 2018. Oh man, when was the road trip event? It was a long time ago now, almost a year. But by the time that we had discovered it, that event was long gone. Few people had picked this up from the shop, but as I speak, I do believe it is available in the Year 2 birthday llamas. So if you have this weapon and you didn't even know that it was in your inventory, or you have the old Betsy, these are the same gun, I'll talk about that in a second, I would highly recommend watching the rest of this video. So the old Betsy is the exact same way in every single way, except that it doesn't have a scope, and its range is 10,240 instead of 25,000. I stand in a very, well, from the opinions I've heard, I stand alone as someone who prefers scopes. I like it, honestly. It is one of the best weapons, well, no, it's the best weapon I've ever seen for just sniping out mist monsters while you're defending something. The Neon Sniper comes close. It doesn't quite pack as much of a punch, but it does, shoot through walls, which is really, really great for tagging mist monsters for that reperk challenge. But I like the Spyglass because of the pow that it makes when you shoot it, and the fact that it just one-shots any mist monster from about a 100 zone or lower. And that is the bad news. You will almost never see me using this on stream anymore because of quite a few factors. First of all, I almost always carry a Baron. I mean, just a 42% movement boost is just not something I like going without. My main weapon is never a Spyglass, for obvious reasons. And then my third weapon is either Coconuts, because Blast from the Past is amazing, or it's some kind of rocket launcher. Before we had amazing movement weapons, I would run a main weapon, a rocket, and a sniper 24/7. But that just doesn't really work for me anymore. And the other thing to mention right off the bat is this thing has a 1-to-1 durability. So if you go Shadow Shard, which you absolutely should, I made mine Obsidian before I knew what I was doing, and I even emailed Epic to get it switched over to Shadow Shard, because Shadow Shard Sunbeam is the way you want to go, because it's a high-powered single-shot weapon. Durability doesn't matter if you're not one-shotting the mist monsters. It is a 1-to-1, so when you have 300 shots, it means you have 300 shots. 300 durability is 300 shots. And that doesn't last insanely long unless you're saving this for mist monsters alone. It's not something you want to spam at a mini-boss. It's not worth the fatties. This is for Zappy Faces, Takers, and Smashers. Now, I'm going to just kind of squeeze this in the middle of the video, but my advice for mist monsters is for Zappy Faces, just shoot them in the head. They'll die nice and easy. Takers, if you can get a front-on headshot on the face, that's great, but their hitbox is very, very wonky, and if they're just sitting idle, shooting them in the back of the head tends to work pretty well, and you want to aim a little higher than lower here. They are very tough to hit out of the sky. If they're flying sideways, try to hit them on like the cheek or the front of their face, otherwise you won't get the headshot bonus. And that's my best advice. If you're on console, good luck. If you're on PC, this will be great training. This is kind of a skill weapon because you're aiming for the head here, all right? You got to hit those shots. For a Smasher, that little tiny head is almost always only accessible from the front, so this might not always be the best weapon to use. In zones where it's applicable, 94 zones, 100 zones and lower, it's usually 2 on the low end, 3 shots to kill a Smasher on the high end, and then past 100 zones, I'll talk about that now. So that's where I was getting at earlier is the bad news. Is like the first part is I don't have room for it in my inventory, and the second part is I'm a power 131 with maximum damage that you can get as far as I'm aware. It just doesn't one-shot enemies past the 100 zones. If I can illustrate this on the map here, I've got some footage you guys can check out here. You can see that it doesn't one-shot anything in the 100 zones while I'm solo, and if I have a group, I think if they're boosting me, I can one-shot up to 108 zones, but if it's like a 108 4-player, it just won't work anymore. And then you can see in the 94 zones and lower, it'll take them right out with a single shot, which is fantastic and my favorite way to use this weapon. But yeah, past that, it leaves them at 1 HP, and it's just kind of a bummer because You know, that's half the map, you guys. All of this, it just doesn't make sense to use a Spyglass, because if it can't one-shot a Mist monster, then, I mean, almost any other weapon is better at that point. I like standing on the defense and just taking them out one by one by one by one by one, even though, you know, there are a lot of different ways to do that, but it's a very fun thing to do if you like being a sniper. So, yeah, I used to use this weapon a lot more. It was my first 4-star weapon and my first 5-star weapon. It's a powerhouse. If you are not high level twine and you're in Canny or Plankerton or Stonewood or early twine, pick this weapon up and make it gold. And there are two things to say on this. I opt for double reload. To reload your shot directly impacts how many shots you can get off, and 2 reloads is definitely preferred. However, if you're in those lower zones or you're kind of a lower level player, adding this damage perk helps a ton. It is a very, very good way to go. That will absolutely, you know, tip the scales and allow you to headshot in one hit when you normally couldn't. And then, of course, double headshot, because you want to maximize that huge headshot multiplier. And the conversation that I am happy to have, crit rating and crit damage, why don't you? This thing fires one shot at a time, and you have to reload between every shot. And it has a 15% base crit chance. Maxed out, you'll have about a 43% chance to crit, and I would never recommend gambling with every bullet with a sniper like this. It just doesn't make sense. It's not something you want to do. You don't want to be aiming at a zappy face and just kind of crossing your fingers that it headshots. Absolutely not. You want to crossing your fingers that it one-shots. You want to put everything you got into headshot damage, just so that you can assure that you're going to take out whatever you're shooting at. And then also, I have seen some builds that use impact, so reload and impact. I'm going to sound naive here, but I mean, I did the whole Frost Knight thing. I've done those higher level challenges. I've been playing with this weapon for a very long time. I don't really see where impact is useful day to day. Maybe in a specific circumstance you'll want that. This weapon does have a massive impact amount. A lot of people use the old Betsy, just kind of like a cannon. You can do that. That's obviously an option, but not something I personally use or totally recommend. And then lastly, something that I think would be slightly controversial is physical. I've seen a ton of people make these weapons energy. While I can't specifically say that that's a bad idea, you're usually using this for mist monsters. And mist monsters are an interesting case, because zappy faces and takers will never be elemental unless it's an event or they change something fundamental to the game. And smashers, honestly, if you got an elemental smasher in front of you, you probably shouldn't be tickling it with a sniper. Just pull out a high DPS weapon and take care of the smasher. I almost never recommend using a spyglass on a smasher, even if it's physical. And then, of course, because those guys are always physical, you want that 24% extra damage that you get from physical weapons, because all elements will do 100% of the total damage plus 20%. Physical does 100% plus 44. So if you're using this for mist monsters, physical is absolutely the way to go. And that's it. That is the best perks for what I consider to be the one true sniper in Fortnite Save the World. As I understand it, it is the hardest hitting sniper in the game, second only to a sniper that I don't even consider to be a sniper. And if that's, I can find it down here, the Yeoman or the Yemen. I don't actually know how to pronounce this thing, and I also can't seem to find it. But it's a sniper that I'm sure you've heard of, and it kind of shoots like a javelin projectile. It's not exactly the easiest thing to use. I don't like this. I don't like it at all. It's not unusable, and you can, if you know more than I do, spec it up and use this instead. But no. The Spyglass beats it in just sheer range. I think they have the same range, but it doesn't have any drop off, so you can just put it in the crosshair, pull your trigger, and take out a mist monster from way off. And that is maybe not helpful during the mission, but something I personally enjoy a ton. And I don't think there's any other single shot snipers in the game besides this one or the Yemen. So that's why I say I think it's the only true bolt action or sniper in the entire game, and it's a damn good one at that. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys have the schematic. I hope you're watching this just out of curiosity and you end up digging this thing out. If you do, let me know. I'd love to hear that kind of stuff. If you have any feedback on the video and what I might have missed, what I might have gotten wrong, let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and have a nice day. The Jack's Revenge, what a powerhouse. This weapon made waves when it first released because people were reporting crits of over millions of damage, and I never actually quite saw that for myself, but I don't doubt it for a second because the Jack's Revenge is incredibly powerful. In fact, when I run it with this double headshot in a full enough party, this headshot damage goes up over 1,000,000, and I can't show this because I don't have a full party, but that one gets cut off and it can't actually display the amount of digits for how powerful this thing is. You can see that I'm rolling a double headshot damage with this, and that's because I like hard hitting consistent damage. I go reload, opting to not do that extra damage because a reload perk is definitely going to be more effective than an extra damage perk. I think it's a little silly to go for that 30% damage when you are going to be reloading at a 1.7 reload is already slow, so you're going to be reloading extra slow if you don't do that. I can't recommend reload them enough. But I do have damage up here, and we'll talk about the crit build in a second. But I like to have that consistent damage. It is hitting for 668,000 per shot right now. Every single shot that I hit a headshot, it is doing a lot. And headshot eliminations actually boost your critical hit chance with sword attacks for 15 seconds, which is really, really bizarre until you realize that it came out with a sister, the Corsair right over here, which on crit increases pistol headshot damage. You see the theme here? So the Corsair and the Jack's Revenge are obviously designed to be used together along with a couple of our pirate heroes. It's not going to be easy for me to show both of these because I kind of have to track them down, but we'll at least show Swashbuckler. Oh, I'm not even going to try that name because dealing pistol damage will increase your sword damage, and then there's, I think I could find him, Buccaneer Jonesy over here should increase your sword damage and your pistol damage. So if you use both of those in a loadout with one as the commander or the other as a commander, switching between these weapons will constantly be buffing each other, and it's kind of a weird way to play, and I'm not going to focus too much on that because that's a whole specific loadout and play style for a conversation for another day. I want to talk about the Jack's Revenge specifically right now, and to show that with the double headshot, you don't need any of that other stuff. It'll be hitting plenty hard. So now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about the other way to go about this. Now, I do not roll crit rating double crit damage on this for a couple of reasons. Like I said, I enjoy consistent damage. I like that every time I hit the head, it's going to hit really, really hard. I have okay accuracy, so I could do that fairly consistently. If you want to go for a way where you're not relying on the headshots and you want to rely more on crits, the best you'll get is a 43% chance to crit, which is less than half your shots, and when you're shooting one at a time, I just can't discourage this any further. But it is true that if you run totally rocking out with this build, you'll actually be able to buff your crit chance by a lot, and you might even get some more consistency. So crit rating double crit damage could actually be a really, really good way to go about that, especially if you're using totally rocking out. However, I could never sign off on that unless you're running totally rocking out, because this is not a DPS weapon. So damage per second is how much damage you could do in a second, obviously, but that's more for SMGs and faster firing weapons. This weapon's damage per second is however much damage you're doing right now, because you're only shooting once every second, or with a 1.7 reload once every 2 seconds. It's pretty bad. It's pretty slow fire rate, so you can roll double crit damage crit rating if you're running totally rocking out, or double headshot damage. And energy is something that I kind of question here, because if you're using the Jack's Revenge, you're not using it against normal zombies. This is not a crowd clearer. This is not a primary weapon. Obviously, it's meant to be used with a sword. What you should be doing is sweeping away crowds of enemies with a sword and then hitting a mist monster in the head with your Jack's Revenge. And if you're aiming for mist monsters, physical might be a better way to go here. However, smashers can be elemental, and they'll probably be your biggest threat. So that's why I rolled energy on this, just in case you see an elemental smasher. However, physical can buff that enormous damage even higher. Thank you guys so much for watching. That's the Jack's Revenge. Corsair will come out either later today or tomorrow. Stay tuned for that, and have a nice day. Well, we talked about the Jack's Revenge, so might as well cover the Corsair. The Corsair is an interesting sword because of that 6 perk right there. On crit, increases pistol headshot damage by 40%. If not for that 6 perk, I would honestly say this is a really good sword. I still say it's a really good sword, but I have never personally used the Corsair unless I was coupling it with the Jack's Revenge, so that's how all of the footage is going to be for this video. However, this would be perfectly good if you threw on a typical ninja build. I'll drop my video on that in the description below. So the Corsair's perks are pretty simple. I'm not the biggest fan of crit damage, crit rating, but when you're coupling this with the Jack's Revenge, your crits increase the Jack's Revenge damage, so it's kind of a symbiotic relationship that you're going to to want to encourage. So crit rating, crit damage is pretty straightforward. I wouldn't really change much about that. Attack speed and damage doesn't really level out the same way that fire rate and damage does on the faster firing weapons. So a crit build is definitely good, especially for a melee weapon. When you have Whiteout Fiona in the support like I do, a 55.5% chance. Okay, fine. Yeah, that's high enough for me. Let's run crit damage on this. And then, of course, we have attack speed, just so you're swinging quicker. You could do double crit rating if you were specifically trying to buff the Jack's Revenge there, but I think attack speed is absolutely the way to go on this, because a 0.4 swing speed is pretty fast for swords, and you definitely want to go with that. This movement speed perk is probably the most diverse option I've seen on any weapon in a long time. I don't look at a ton of melees, but there are very few ranged weapons that have this many options, and from here, you guys can do whatever you want. I prefer movement speed because when I'm using it with the Jack's Revenge, it actually replaces my Baron, so to have a little bit of movability, especially in a normal fight even, is nice to have. Armor can make you stronger. Durability we don't care about. Life Leech, it'll heal you in the middle of the fight, so if you're using Blast from the Past like I was, that could be nice too. Heavy attack efficiency isn't the biggest deal for this one because this heavy attack is actually pretty decent. I was impressed by it, but it's not anything worth perking into. Or you could just do a complete extra damage perk. I would not vote against damage. Damage is a great way to go, but again, since you're mostly sort of switching off between the pistol and the sword, you don't really need another damage perk. If movement speed can keep you more alive and more mobile, then, you know, you can do that. This is totally up to you guys. I just want to show you the options. Damage is the best way to go if you're trying to maximize your damage. And that is pretty much it for the perks on this. It's usually a much bigger conversation, but when you have a 6 perk like that and you have a great coupling with another weapon in the game, you kind of have to play into that, and it's certainly a fun way to go. The Corsair is one of my favorite weapons to use. You won't see me use it often, but, you know, throwing on the Corsair and the Jack's Revenge and a nice loadout like you can see here is a fun way to play every once in a while when I'm in the mood. So I usually don't talk about loadouts too much in these weapon guides, but it's important because these weapons are so unique from the others. And this is not a perfect loadout. There are a lot of ways you could go about this, but the core of it is Swashbuckler and Buccaneer Jonesy. I think is his name? Yeah, Buccaneer Jonesy. So they, dealing sword damage increases pistol damage, and then on the vice versa up here, dealing pistol damage increases sword damage. You can use whichever one you prefer. I thought that the Corsair needed the damage buff more than the Jack's Revenge, because the Jack's Revenge is headshotting for 1,000,000 damage in a party without any of these bonuses, so I don't think that weapon needs any help whatsoever. However, it did leave some of my Mist monsters a little bit weak, so there could be a little bit of, you know, flexibility there. However, I went with Swashbuckler in the lead, and then, of course, I buffed the Anatomy Lessons and the Saurian Claws. Obviously, I could do Saurian Might, or pistol damage right down here if I wanted to buff the Jack's Revenge. Going Coconuts is not only great from Blast from the Past, but it is a pirate, so keeping with the pirate theme, he does come from the same llama that Swashbuckler and Buccaneer Jonesy come from, so if you're opening pirate llamas and you've never used Coconuts before, this could be a super fun build to try out for the first time flexing these new heroes. There are a lot of ways to go about this loadout. As I said, I'll link my ninja video in the description below. You can check it out there if you're just trying to buff the sword. Thank you guys so much for watching. Check out my Jack's Revenge video, link below. If you haven't watched it already, I'd be kind of surprised because these two weapons go hand in hand really great. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next one. Let's make this quick. The Duelist is a 6-shot revolver that does very decent damage with a pretty decent fire rate and very decent accuracy. It is a pretty good all-around weapon that lacks in the same place that most pistols do, and that is area of effect damage. So if you are going for raw single target damage and you're trying to do a lot against Mist monsters, crit rating, crit damage is a pretty standard build, but it's especially good for the flintlock weapons because it has a base 15% crit chance and a base 75% crit damage, which means you're going to get 43% crit chance and a really decent crit damage, so it's nice and balanced out, and you don't really need to worry about not critting because you're going to be hitting plenty hard all the time. And then, of course, you want that 5th perk to match the 6th perk. If you have Affliction, you want it to be Affliction. As of recently, Affliction got a buff, so Affliction might actually be a better way to go nowadays. However, if you're shooting a weapon like this, you might want your target to be slower. That's entirely up to you. Energy is the best all-around element in terms of just, you know, usability across all the different other elements. However, if you want a more specific element, like fire will do more against nature than energy will to nature, but it'll also do far less damage to water. I'll link my video on elements in the description below. However, there is another way to do it that I'm actually quite happy about. Now, I'm going to mention that this is not an easy weapon, okay? Most pistols aren't. If you're using a 6-shooter Duelist, I'm going to assume that your accuracy is decent and you kind of know how to survive in a fight, or you have like a rocket launcher secondary or something along those lines. lines, but if you have decent accuracy and you can pull this off, double headshot is actually really okay, especially if you have the headshot eliminations cause an explosion 6 perk. Now, I'm not sure anybody's good enough to use the 5 headshots in a row 6 perk. I don't think that 30% damage is ever going to help you. I don't recommend against that, but I got this great footage of an encampment where I had a crit build in the middle and my headshot on the left on my hotbar down there, and the headshot one was really, really good if I could, hit a headshot and clear out a crowd of zombies, whereas even though the crit build is more DPS, on average, it does more, damage per second, it was actually failing against this crowd of zombies because there was no area of effect damage. So if you have the accuracy, you can go for a double headshot build and it'll actually be quite effective. You can see that it has pretty decent kill time on smashers. You can see the comparison here. It's not so bad. I really do vouch for the headshot build, assuming you can hit the shots, because the headshots aren't the most consistent thing in Save the World. Enemies do turn around and that will completely cripple your damage, because if you can't hit a headshot, then it's not going to do much. Now, that is a nice little compromise. Of course, you could do a hybrid build. Like, if you run a crit build on this, you can do damage to miss monsters on the bottom and run it with a headshot eliminations perk. I think I've never said this in any video before, I don't think, but I actually would recommend headshot eliminations because that extra area of effect damage is super useful with a weapon like this, and I don't think Slowed and Snared or Affliction is going to go quite as far as that in that regard. However, if you are using the Duelist for like mist monsters or mini bosses for some reason, you are going to want to be doing as much damage as possible. Going to my schematic so I can show you the perks, I will say that reload is certainly better than mag size for a couple of reasons. First off, you want to just reload faster. 6 shots going up to like 9 or 10 shots is not a world of difference, and you are going to have to reload eventually, and that 2.4 second reload time will take you out of the fight for longer than you want. As you might have seen earlier, I am using Calamity in this footage, and Calamity only buffs the first 6 shots in your magazine, which makes it perfect for the Duelist, because not only does she give an extra 75% impact, but the weapon has extremely good impact already. So you can see every single time I shot a fatty, they rolled over because the impact was knocking them over. So that's actually a really, really good bonus to have. And if you increase the mag size, then some of your bullets won't actually be affected by Calamity, and your commander perk will effectively be dead. So I definitely recommend reload, and I also wanted to show that you can't put a double damage build on this. So you're basically going to have to go crit build if you don't want to go double headshot, and I'm not a huge fan of crit. I try to recommend every video that there are other options. However, I don't really see another way to go about it, but I don't think it's going to be too big of a deal because this weapon is going to crush regardless. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know if you got the Duelist from the llamas recently. It's a pretty good weapon. If you've never thought about it, I'd highly recommend trying it out. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll link to my pistol loadout in the description below if you guys want to use this thing to the best of its ability. See you guys in the next one, and have a nice day. Oh, look at that. It's a new bow, and oh, wait, what is that? It explodes at the same time? Wait, is this a new boom bow? Because that's what everybody's asking me. It turns out that this weapon is not a new boom bow. So let's go over the powder keg, what it brings to the table, and why it's different from the other bows. First and foremost, it fires an explosive barrel. That's what this thing is. It's charged with explosives, but you'll note that there's actually a fuse on this one. So it's not quite like the boom bow where it just explodes on impact and has actually kind of a somewhat small radius on the boom bow. No. This thing sticks, then after 2 seconds, or upon elimination, as you'll see, it'll explode into a pretty big radius, affecting pretty much everything nearby, staggering them in the process. So it is actually a very versatile weapon, and it's because of that sticking. So not only if you're shooting a taker or something will it follow the enemy and explode when it's ready, it's not just going to sit there and be blowing up. It actually sticks to an enemy, and if they walk towards you, they can group together, and then it'll affect way more enemies in a pretty big area, which makes this a very, very useful weapon because you get the initial damage impact, which is very unimpressive. In fact, if I go to the schematic that I was using in game here, you can see that the actual damage is pretty, well, unimpressive. I was hitting for about 56, 59, about 60,000 damage, and it was only critting for about just under 200,000. Now, that's with like 2 of us in a group and just a normal crit build, as you can see on here, but that's not the only thing, because every time it exploded, it was actually doing about 250,000. So what I'd recommend if you're going up against a higher level enemy like a smasher or a mist monster or even a crowd of zombies, just spam as many shots as you can. That's why I'm totally going to recommend using reload on this, because you are going to want to pop off as many shots as possible. Your damage is not just coming from the initial impact, it is coming from that explosion, which does bring me to the fact that it has slowed and snare, which is nice, I guess. I mean, slowed and snare has always been good, but if there is another way to get a copy of this weapon someday in the future that's not slowed and snared, Affliction would be a much, much better 6 perk on this. That would be definitely the better way to go, in my opinion. But unfortunately, we are stuck with slowed and snared. So, yes, I went with a crit build on this, and that's just because it's sort of a baseline. That's what I use on pretty much every bow I test. Everybody who's watched my videos before knows that I'm kind of against crit rating, crit damage on a bow that fires like this. However, there's a bit of a caveat, because the explosion damage, while I assume it can crit, like most abilities can, does affect a lot of enemies at once, so you're going to get a lot of opportunities to crit, and it was very, very regularly doing plenty of damage. So I don't actually think you really need to go all damage on this. Normally I'd recommend reload as a minimum, and then damage to slowed and snared would be kind of nice, but it's only actually better than damage on the third shot, because the first shot they're not afflicted, you know. On the second shot you're hitting a slowed and snared target, so it's a 45% damage buff, but really it's like a 22.5. And then on the third shot you finally equal out to about an average of a 30% damage bonus. I highly recommend just going damage to get that bonus right off the bat, because as you can see, it's just killing everything normally on the first shot and almost always on the second shot. On those bigger enemies, it's going to matter more, but if you're on a bigger enemy that's really giving you trouble, you're just going to be spamming shots anyway. It'll get taken care of. There's nothing to worry about there. And that brings me to, you know, the other crit build. So obviously, reload, damage, that's my recommendation. Damage to slowed and snared to match if you want. And then double damage might be more consistent. That might be, you know, okay all around. You could go damage and headshot damage. It does have a pretty crazy multiplier. Bows are known for this. If you're an absolute marksman and you are really consistent in hitting your shots, then you can go a headshot perk on this, but it's going to be pretty inconsistent because all an enemy has to do is turn around to completely disable that perk. So I would recommend going at least some form of damage here, whether it be damage, crit rating, or crit damage. A lot of people in my chat were chanting the usual double crit rating, double crit damage. Never do that. It's almost never a good idea because, like I said, you're going to definitely want reload, but that second crit rating meets diminishing returns, which means the crit rating bonus you get, so the chance to crit, you know, divide or multiply that % chance to crit by crit damage, and it's actually quite a bit less than a normal damage perk. I'm not going to get into the math on that. I'm not even going to show it on screen. I'm just going to say that a crit rating is effectively less DPS than just a normal damage perk. That is almost always true. If you do want to use Totally Rockin' Out on this, you can go, you know, crit rating, crit damage, reload. There's not really an opportunity for a double crit damage unless you give up that reload perk. As I said, you're totally going to want it, but I mean, a 1.3 reload speed isn't the worst thing in the world. You'll just get off a lot more shots if you do have that reload perk. So that's my final recommendation. Reload, crit rating, crit damage, damage might be the best all around. That's what I was using in the gameplay. Double crit damage, crit rating, and then damage down here if you want to use Totally Rockin' Out. If you are going all in on Totally Rockin' Out, where your crit rating's going up, you might want another crit rating perk, but I still think damage would be more useful there. And then, of course, you know, there's an all-around build, which is just reload double damage, and then, or even reload triple damage if you really just want to get very consistent damage output. And then, of course, you can go do, you know, headshot damage if you can really, really trust your shot. I'm going to let you guys make your decision on that one. I do say that it is going to be a nice damage buff. That headshot is going to hit for a lot, but again, your damage is really coming from explosions, and explosions can't hit headshots. So as for the element, I mean, physical is good if you're in, you know, Canny Valley or lower, but even late Canny Valley and Twine is when you're going to run into a lot more elemental enemies, so energy will probably be the best all around. Same thing as usual there. As you can see, we were messing around with a fire element, and it really struggled against water enemies, but it's slayed nature. So that's it for the powder keg. I really like this one. I'm so glad that Epic seemed to save kind of the best for last. I mean, I know that the vacuum tube bow and, you know, a lot of the other bows have actually been really, really good. I'll link my bows in the description below, but the Xenon bow really impressed me. That'll be the recommended card at the end of the video. I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't seen the Xenon bow. That one was really amazing as well, and I'm really, really happy with this one. Huge thanks to Nathaniel, Triton, and Tempest, 3 people all helping me out getting this schematic, tripping over themselves to try and help me out. It was a kind of a mad dash to get this video done, but I appreciate everybody who tried and helped me, but I think I'm actually going to be leveling up my own schematic because this weapon was such a blast to use. Pun intended. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Recommend any future videos I might want to cover. Use code Mista at your checkout to support the channel, and have a nice day, you guys. Oh, the bowler. What an awesome weapon. I can't believe I didn't cover this the first time it came to the game. This thing is actually way better than I thought it was. So it explodes effectively. It doesn't really explode, but it makes an impactful, damaging moment whenever it hits the ground, and it bounces between 3 and 4 times. I'm not exactly sure if the bowler is on a timer or if it explodes after a certain amount of bounces, but it doesn't even matter because this thing will do a ton of damage in the meantime. So it's a bit tricky to use. I'm not going to say that this is going to be any kind of new launcher that you should be using all the time. It's not new. It's been about a year at this point, but it is an extremely fun way to play. So you got to know what you're doing. It's really, really good for bank shots. You can shoot against a crowd of enemies, try to hit it off a wall. You can box something in and try to have it ricochet a bunch of times. I didn't have a ton of success with that, but it is an option. You can be an absolute marksman and just snipe an enemy from way off. I don't recommend that. That's kind of a hard shot to hit, and it's not really consistent, but it's not a weapon that you can just fire into a crowd of enemies and have it explode for 500,000 damage. It hits for like 1 to 200,000 damage depending on your level and your perks and everything. We'll get into that in a second, of course. But it will hit multiple times if you shoot it correctly, and that's really what you're going for. In fact, the only old clip from an old video I'm going to use here is one from Ben's when we were making the best rockets video. Link to that in the description below, where he got this awesome shot of the bowler just cleaving through a crowd of zombies, and I always thought that was a really cool way to do it because they were basically pins and he was launching a cannonball. So the best perks for the bowler are kind of basic and pretty standard for rocket launchers here. I have damage to slowed and snared. I think that's a common thing for all of the bowlers. I believe this is a shop weapon, so they all came the same way. If there is a different perk than slowed and snared, then you're going to want to match it to affliction, but I'm assuming everybody has slowed and snared. So damage to slowed and snared is basically your best option here. Damage to stun staggered is pretty easy because it's a rocket launcher, so you're going to be staggering a lot of enemies, and miss monsters might work if you really want to do more damage to them, but initially this weapon will do less damage on the first shot, but 45% more on every single hit afterwards. So if you're planning on hitting a crowd of zombies more than once, damage to slowed and snared might be the best way to go there. However, you have some other options. Reload speed is definitely a preference thing, but I highly recommend it because your damage from this thing, or your DPS, your damage per second, is almost entirely dependent on how many shots you can get off. So I do think it's worth it to forego an extra damage perk for this reload. Back in the day, I would have recommend durability at some point if at all possible, but launchers are definitely in a better state than they used to be. However, you are going to chew through rockets if you start using this thing more regularly. Energy is just best all around. I'm not going to really talk about this too much. You don't want varying elements on a rocket launcher. You just want it to hit everything for as much as it can. That would be physical, but so many enemies are elemental that energy is just kind of the way to go. And this is where I'm probably going to get some controversial comments. Double damage, definitely. When it is a rocket launcher and you're only hitting them once, maybe twice, yes, you can crit every single enemy individually. So if you shoot a crowd of 10 zombies, or rather, let me say, if you shoot a crowd of 100 zombies, which is unrealistic, but mathematically it makes this easier, on average, 38% of them will crit if you run a crit build on this. But you don't want to be rolling dice that 30% of your enemies that you hit are going to be crit. You just want all of your shots to do a ton of damage, and double damage will be more than enough for almost everything you're shooting at, because again, we're talking about a high-powered rocket launcher here. So you can roll crit rate and crit damage if you are an absolute fiend for doing the absolute highest DPS on paper, but like I said, your DPS is basically dependent on your reload. So this isn't really a damage per second weapon. It's a launcher. You're going to be hitting every enemy once, maybe twice, or 3 times if you can bank it like a boss, but you're not really going to be hitting them enough to recommend a crit build on this. So that's it for the bowler. Really simple weapon. I don't want to go on too long about it. It's just a very fun, very awesome rocket launcher, and it's a fun one to use. I had a great time getting the footage for this, but since it's kind of quirky, I don't know how much I'll use it in the future, but it's a good one to pull out. If I'm ever streaming and you want to see it, let me know. If you want to support the channel, feel free to use code Mista at your checkout. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a nice day. Hey, fun fact. So today the power went out for over an hour. Sister and I went to Burger King. It was a great trip, and my PC didn't turn on. So be glad that I actually got things to work, because this video might not have happened at all. So today we're talking about the Walloper, and with it will come some of the most confusion I've ever had with a weapon in knowing what Epic wanted us to do with this thing, and probably my most unique perk recommendation to date. So let's get right into it. This is a slow swinging, high impact, high damage hammer that is very unique in that it shares the qualities of the Storm King's Fury, where it can lunge forward. I know the Guardian's Will fans are out there, but it's a hardware just like the Storm King's Fury. So if you use this in the Storm King fight, I think it could be okay against the Horn, but it's going to be very slow swinging, and I would never recommend it for that. So let's get straight into the perks, because I didn't record a lot of gameplay because I did not know what to do with this weapon. Right before we get into it, big thanks to Eternal Sky for dropping me 3 copies of this. He's a very nice guy in our Discord. If you join the Minerva Discord, link below, you might be able to chat with him. Very very friendly, and he has a lot of reperk from grinding endurance, so he was able to give me 3 copies of this. So starting off with the first one is just kind of a fun build. He rolled double heavy attack efficiency on this, not knowing that there's actually a third option at the very top. That's completely unnecessary, even without any serious energy regeneration. This is just Dino Southie on the side, as you can see, he's just in my support. This was almost infinite heavy attack spam, and I thought this would just be like a funny build for getting around the map, but it actually ended up being really decent at actually eliminating enemies, and that's going to influence my opinion on some of these recommendations later on. But I just wanted to show you that it's possible, and you can lunge with this thing, and it's kind of a fun build. And one of the builds that I thought was going to work a little bit better than potentially a normal crit build was attack speed, double damage to slowed and snared. So of course we're matching that 6 perk down there, but this was very good swing speed, but really not amazing damage. And I thought it would get a lot better with the crit build, but it didn't. It was like a slower swing speed with what felt like the exact same damage. I'll be frank, I didn't really do the math on this weapon. I didn't think it was completely necessary, but from real world experience, the crit build was just slower, and it crit for more damage. That was nice. And when I heavy attacked, that did a lot of damage, but it didn't really impress me. I know crit build is kind of the default for these weapons, but if you can't roll attack speed, crit rating, crit damage, which is one of the reasons the Storm King's Fury is so phenomenal, is because it's a very hard-hitting weapon, but it has fantastic perks. And I'm only showing this weapon because its lunge is very similar, and it's basically like the Crown hardware weapon. It's a very high swing speed with high damage. It's what you want. But Epic has not allowed us to do attack speed, crit rating, crit damage. And if that's possible in the future, that is definitely a great way to go on this weapon. I highly recommend that, but as of now, attack speed is occupied by our other crit slots, so I can't really recommend that. But I can't really recommend attack speed double damage here either, and that is where I will propose a very unique build. So attack speed double damage and a crit build are the standard. These are like what I think most people would go with just by default, but what I'm going to propose to you guys today is that you use attack speed for the swing speed, keep the damage on the bottom, and then use heavy attack efficiency in the second perk slot, and then at the very bottom, I'm not kidding you, I actually recommend doing damage to stunned, staggered, and knocked back targets, because like I said, heavy impact, heavy damage, a very, very spammable heavy attack. You might need 2 heavy attack efficiencies to spam it as much as I would like to, but what I'm proposing is that you use the heavy attack as much as possible, and then maybe use that attack speed damage to get some normal damage, polish off, finish off whatever you're just attacking, and then clean up the crowd, because that heavy attack is very, very decent damage. It stuns and knocks back almost everything, so you can get a lot of extra damage, because that stunned and knockback, if I can actually pull up a screenshot on my side here, is actually 15% more damage than the slowed and snared. So if that's going to be happening very frequently, you might have a very decent build here. But beyond my crazy perk recommendation there is one final loadout that's actually really, really viable and kind of cheating, because I don't like using Totally Rockin' Out for this stuff, and you can probably already tell where this is going, because Totally Rockin' Out pretty much makes any weapon good. I did use it on my Argon Axe video, but that was kind of because that's a very kooky weapon, and I'll let that video explain in the link below. But with the Walloper, you will not have that attack speed, but you can go double crit damage at the top with damage on the bottom, just, you know, normal build. Maybe you can even do heavy attack efficiency and spam that as well. But the catch here is that Totally Rockin' Out here will actually buff your attack speed and allow this to be a pretty usable weapon overall, and that might give you an extra option if you're trying to really make this weapon work and you wanted to make the Walloper worth the investment. Unfortunately, what I'm recommending here is kind of like the best of the worst. This is not a weapon that I think gets much use for a reason. I don't see it pulled out very often, but it is kind of a special weapon, as it's sort of part of the trio of the pirate weapons that we have not received. The Bundlebuss received many, many, many rounds of hype. We were hyped about this weapon for over a month. The Bowler, very, very cool weapon. Video on that as soon as it's out. In fact, if you're watching this, you've probably already seen that, so link to that below. And then the Walloper was the last weapon that they did not release, along with all the other weapons in the llamas, which is kind of weird because the Corsair is like a better melee in like every single way. So I don't know what they think is so special about the Walloper, but that's pretty much all I have to say about that. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Use code Mista to check out if you want to help support the channel. I've never ever plugged this in a video, but if you really want to help support the channel and you have the means, try becoming a channel member. I have a join button, or at least I should. There are quite a few members on the channel. It's linked in every single video. If you guys want to get some perks in the streams, get some custom emotes, roll in our Discord, green name in the streams. I think YouTube will be allowing custom emotes in the chat someday. That's not announced, but it's got to be coming. There's no way. You can already see member badges in the comments, and it really really does go a long way in helping support me. I appreciate you guys checking out the video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a nice day. For the very first time, I'm covering more than one weapon in a best perks video. Now, I have done something like this before in weapon videos like the Buzz Cut and the Hunter Killer and the Thrasher and the Riptide, but those were because they were scavenger weapons. And we do have a similar thing going on with the Old Smoky and the Thunderbolt. You'll note that these weapons are basically identical. If you're not somebody who knows how scavenger weapons work, basically they are just a weapon set that is a remake of the base game weapons, but they're cheaper. So the Old Smoky has all of the exact same stats. It is identical in perk choices and everything, except that it's cheaper to cost and it uses less durability. I'll do the math for you. It is more ammo efficient. This is why I've actually leveled up an Old Smoky over here instead of a Thunderbolt. That's because it's just the exact same weapon, but cheaper in the long run. But the other weapon that we're talking about is the Dragoon. Now, the Dragoon isn't going to be as much of a feature because it is, to my knowledge, before recording this video, basically the same weapon that does more damage. In fact, I'm going to kind of spoil the perks here, but they're base game shotguns, so I don't think anybody's going to be surprised by a crit build. There are better options than crit, kinda, apparently. We'll talk about that later on, but that'll get, mentioned later in the video. But the Old Smoky and the Dragoon, if you compare them, the crit is the same, the fire rate's the same, the mag size, everything looks identical, but there are some key differences. Other than the durability, of course, because it's a scavenger variant here. The damage is higher, apparently, on the Dragoon, and the impact is higher. I agree with the impact. I believe that. But if I pull up the fancy spreadsheet made long ago with the weapon changes, something was noted. So Dyson, I actually spoke to him about this spreadsheet a while back in a private call, and what he shared with me was the fact that the Dragoon in-game still looks like it has that base 300 damage. That's actually why it appears like it's doing way more damage than the Old Smoky and the Thunderbolt. But if you actually look at the actual stats and you shoot an enemy in-game, it is doing half the damage it should be. Now, I'm not 100% about that. I was getting better results the second time I recorded the Dragoon, and it's a very, very widespread weapon. You're hitting a lot of enemies at once. It's more of a crowd clearer rather than like a single target weapon, but honestly, just comparing it and the Old Smoky, I could definitely tell that it felt like it was doing less damage. This could be largely opinionated, but what's not opinionated is the fact that that ammo cost is very important. You can see that while they both have the same reload and the same mag size, the Dragoon is firing both shells per shot instead of just one, which means you are basically literally reloading twice as often. Not only does that cut your uptime basically in half, or a third, depending on how you look at it, but it actually makes it so that, you can fire 2 shots instead of 1, giving doubling your chance to hit a crit, which is not, technically how that works, but you have more chances to crit, not a higher probability. So you get more shots often. That's just a better thing all around. And when I was using the Dragoon, I was just so disappointed that I was going to say I was so disappointed I wasn't going to show any more of it in this video, and that's true, but a long time ago I was going to cover this weapon, and I was still so disappointed that I just stopped using it. It is my understanding that the only use for the Dragoon is essentially like a walking wall launcher, and that only made sense when smashers were like able to be flung around effectively. Nowadays, they barely get budged, and it's just I don't see any use for the Dragoon. So for the rest of this video, we're going to be focusing on the Old Smoky, which, as a reminder, should be noted as basically the Thunderbolt, just cheaper. Now, as for the Old Smoky, I was wildly impressed. It was doing really, really decent damage to large crowds of enemies. In fact, initially, I was just clearing encampments without even trying. It is able to affect a whole bunch of enemies all at once. I'm not 100% sure how much enemy, or like how many enemies it can hit at once. I don't know if that pierce is infinite or not, but it is very, very nice. And while it's not great against smashers, it will do decent damage. It's critting in the hundreds of thousands fairly regularly. It is much better for encampments or large crowds of enemies, which is really, really nice for especially a shotgun. It's a lot like the Pulsar 9000. While the Pulsar 9000 doesn't have the greatest single target damage, it is very, very good at just deleting everything in front of it. So the more enemies you can pack in front of you, the bigger bang for your buck you're getting. So with the Old Smoky, I'm a little disappointed that I didn't really, check into this weapon earlier. In fact, like I said, I always had the understanding that it was the same as the Dragoon, and the Old Smoky I used a long time ago must not have been perked right, because I have tried it before and I was not impressed. In fact, the low range is a big deal. It means every enemy you're shooting at needs to be essentially right in front of you, or else you're going to do like no damage at all. And that kind of thing is sort of annoying to me, and it's not really into my playstyle. In fact, the ground pounder used to be a lot more of the way that I like to play, but trying it out today, I can definitely say that the Old Smoky is definitely a weapon that I'll keep powered up and something you guys might want to use yourself. I'm going to leave the Dragoon alone for a while after this video to see if I missed anything in the comments down below. You guys can correct me if I got anything wrong about it, but if nobody says anything about the Dragoon, I will probably be recycling the schematic just so I can cover more weapons for you guys. Now, with all that out of the way, let's get into the best perks. So they are very, very similar. The only notable difference is that the Dragoon has a crit rating perk in the second slot and a reload perk in the fourth slot. Whereas if I compare it to the Old Smoky, you'll note that there is no crit rating in the second slot, and there is no second reload in the fourth slot. So, arguably speaking, there are better perks for the Dragoon. In fact, if you want to spec all the way into crit, you can do crit rating double crit damage and just try to use this weapon as like an absolute, dice roll. You could put reload double crit damage and use this with a crit build. This is why I said the crit build wasn't really the best by default, because there are other ways to spec this weapon. However, like I mentioned earlier, for all of the reasons I listed, I'm not certain that the Dragoon is best for any situation other than maybe giving it an impact perk or double reload and impact knockback magnitude 6 perk and using this as a mobile wall launcher for whatever that's useful for. You can save yourself a core reperk and just use one of the rocket launchers with good impact and knockback instead, like the Dam Buster, Sod Buster, Metal Marauder. I'll link those videos down below. Santa's Little Helper. The list goes on. There are way better options for different weapons for knocking things around. As for the Old Smoky, though, let's get into the perks for this one. So, obviously, the crit build is kind of just standard. I like to use this for testing with weapons, but honestly, I feel like the copy that was given to me in my backpack actually had double damage on this. And this was for the Dragoon, but I still think that this carries over to the Old Smoky, where this weapon is garbage if you don't crit. In fact, a lot of the times that I had to go up against the Smasher, for example, every time I didn't crit, I was just dying inside using this weapon, and that is really just fine for a normal crowd. Almost everything is going to die within the range of like 130,000 damage per shot, but if you're going up against one of those bigger targets, which you will in a normal game, there's going to be mini-bosses, there's going to be Smashers, there's going to be, mist monsters, the fatties are going to give you trouble, and not critting is almost not an option with this weapon. So if you're somebody who is okay with a crit build, that will be in the long run the highest DPS, but a double damage build is not something I can really dissuade you from using, and that's something to consider. Also, the damage to afflicted is something I've mentioned a lot in Bo's videos, for example, single target weapon videos, I should say, but the first shot that you hit an enemy with, they're not even going to be taking that extra damage. It's the second and third and beyond shots that are actually going to help. And one of the things I mentioned earlier, which is kind of just a neat little side thing, was when I was scrolling through the perks on this, Fortnite DB apparently breaks down the best perks for these damage-wise, and the crit build is ranked really low, but they gave it a mag size perk, and apparently damage and reload or double reload mag size is better. I'm honestly interested in what that means because I'm not totally certain. I do understand how there could be some sort of like, maybe they're not factoring crits well enough, or if there's something going on like the Ravager, or many of the other swords for that example, where triple attack speed is actually the best DPS with Paleoluna. So I'm not 100% sure what was going on there, but I thought that was funny enough to mention within the video because it was something a little unexpected and not something that I've ever really interacted with before, other than I do have something fun to share with you guys. I probably should have mentioned this. No, you know what? I have mentioned this in other videos, but if you've tuned into my streams, you might have noticed that my pop shot is perked really, really weird. I did this kind of just being silly with a friend one time, and this is just very fun. They were telling me to use double mag size, double reload. I stuck a crit rating perk on there, and I used Buckshot Raptor in the lead, and a double reload mag size pop shot ended up being really, really fun because you reload very, very quickly. That does sort of translate to the Old Smoky in the sense that you might want to do like double reload on this thing, but that is just a fun build. It's not something I can seriously recommend unless you're just trying to have a fun time. As for the element, I did do energy just to keep everything very level and balanced between my weapons, but depending on your current climate, pun intended, you might want to change the element to nature as of recording. As of watching this video day one, Ice Storm is taking over all of the entire map, and all of the different 4 players are Ice Storms. In the future, you might have a more consistent element like fire or nature, and you might want to perk it accordingly. If all of the zones are nature, you're going to want this to be fire, and if every zone is fire, then you're going to want to perk this thing water. Energy is the best all around and will do completely fine, but I would use my nature if I'm going to be using it in the normal missions. But that just about wraps it up for the Old Gold Smoky, Thunderbolt, and the Dragoon. I was really impressed with one of these weapons, and I'm kind of glad to say that I might have a new weapon to add to my repertoire. If you guys want to support the channel, feel free to use code Mista to check out. You guys can become a channel member here, you know, help me out a lot. It also helps if you guys subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. You can follow my Twitch, link in the description below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a nice day. So if you're watching this as of recording, you might be noticing this pirate llama in the shop, and I've covered most of the pirate weapons. I'll try to link them down below, but one of them that I have selectively missed for probably good reason is the Sir Hootie. And that is a melee that I know very little about, and that's why I say probably, because today's question is going to be, is this weapon good or not? And I'm going to say yesn't. It is good and not good. Let's get into it. So this is one of the melees blessed with crit explosion. You might be noticing on the screen that the enemies in front of me are dying in large crowds all at once, and that can save a lot of weapons. I think the crit explosion melees have become a subsection of their own. Nobody cares whether they're club, axes, or swords. If it explodes the enemies on a crit, people are interested, and that is why we are talking about the Sir Hootie today, because not only is the Sir Hootie, you know, part of the pirate set and something relevant, but it's also part of that crit explosion section, which makes it interesting to talk about. Not to mention, again, there's another melee that also has crit explosion. So if you guys want to see the fishing hook soon, comment down below. I am willing to spend a core reperk on this weapon just for you guys, and I'm willing to take a look at it. But for today, we're getting into the Sir Hootie. Now, it's a weapon that doesn't swing fast enough to be a top contender. I'm going to tell you straight up, this is not a best weapon in the game. This is not going to be any sleeper pick that you guys have been missing out on. No, don't click off, don't click off. Get back over here. I promise this video is not over. There is something else to talk about. I guess it's the crit explosion, frankly. It can save a lot of weapons, and it is a club, which does have a couple of issues, and I'm going to get into that now. So, first and foremost, the crit chance is 43%. That is usually something that we can raise with Whiteout Fiona, because she buffs axes, swords, and scythes, which is most of the melees. But then there are weapons like clubs, which don't have any support perk in the game right now as of recording, that actually buffs the crit chance, and the fact that we're only critting 43% of the time is fairly brutal. On top of that, we also have an attack speed of 0.55, and that is another one of the drawbacks of this weapon, because, yeah, you know, 0.55 isn't that bad. That's a swing, like, it's like 2 swings per second. Unfortunately, the way that it actually swings is you get about 4 swings very quickly, and then you just hold it in the air and wait for about a year and a half, and that is really stressful. That alone makes me never want to use this weapon again, and that's just a personal note. If you can put up with that, that's fine. I did find that switching back and forth between 2 weapons can kind of reset that, but that is an annoyance that I will never get over, and I'm not sure too many people are going to disagree with me on that. I think it could be a bug, though. So as I'm recording this, it could be a glitch. People did note in recent videos of mine that in the comment section that there were weapons that are kind of holding that up a little too long. Even some of the swords were affected by this, so maybe this is different in the future. Either way, 0.55 is a pretty respectable swing speed. Again, it's not a top contender. 0.4 is generally what an average, you know, fast sword is, but for a club, it's actually not that bad. And the perks that I'm running on this thing are geared towards activating crit explosions. Generally speaking, there are different ways to run this, but with this specific 6 perk, I did want to have at least 1 crit rating, and you can't really use any melee in the entire game without at least 1 attack speed perk on it, so that is always recommended, period. But because I wanted to activate those crits, the crit rating perk went on. Now, if you're just trying to go for an all-out damage build, Paleoluna is just unfortunately too overpowered. I can't not use her. Totally Rocking Out is an option. It's not preferred by me, but you are welcome to try it. But with Paleoluna, you just want to swing as fast as possible. That will always be the highest DPS every single time we've ever ran the numbers, and I kind of leaned into the critting chance here with the corrosive strikes, just activating that whenever, and this is kind of the build that we're going with. Club damage, to my knowledge, is the only hero perk in the entire game as of recording, because a hero rework is coming soon, and I'll update in the pinned comments if relevant, but this is the only hero in the entire game, to my knowledge, that directly buffs clubs, and only clubs, and that is 17%, certainly better than none. You know, the hardwares are interesting because they get a crit rating perk and damage, so I'm not sure why clubs are left in the dust. Maybe we'll get one in the future, but as of recording, 43% is all we're going to be able to work with. Now, if you're going to try and max out the damage from this, then double attack speed with Luna is the way to go, and if you're going to be using Totally Rockin' Out, then double crit damage is perfectly fine because the attack speed and and crit rating is going to be coming from that team perk. It is a little less consistent, though. You do need your bonus to be active as much as possible, which can be a little tricky to maintain, but it is a way to go. I will also add that the explosion on this is definitely a saver, and that's what I was talking about in the very beginning, because no matter how slow you're swinging or how little damage you're doing, which it's not, 31,500 per hit is actually pretty respectable, it's actually quite nice. If you can get a crowd of enemies, the more enemies nearby, the better this will be. When that crit explosion activates and eliminates all the enemies in one big circle, that is a really nice bonus to have, and the explosion itself is providing extra damage. So that is, like I said, why these weapons are kind of considered to be in their own little subset of the melees, because they are really interesting. Even the worst weapons in this group can actually be quite useful if you're activating that explosion. Now, of course, if you're swinging faster and critting more often, that would definitely yield in a better experience, but that is where we would have to talk about some of the other crit explosion weapons. All of those videos will be linked in the description below, or at least the ones that have been uploaded as of recording. Now, if you're looking to make this thing a proper element, I did energy because I was recording in a zone without a specific element. As of recording, I'm going to be saying this a lot because information likes to change in the future. Pretty much every 4-player is a lightning storm right now, or a nature storm, technically speaking, so you're going to be doing a lot more damage if you're using fire against those targets, but in the future that could change, so just try to put the correct element. If they're a bunch of ice enemies, water enemies, then use nature, and if you're a bunch of, nature enemies, use fire. Like I said, if there's a bunch of fire, use water, and then use physical if you're an insane person, I guess, because you're going to be doing a lot less damage to the elemental enemies, and that can always be a drawback. As for the second perk, I think damage is like the only one that makes any sense here. Movement is kind of nice, impact is unnecessary, and armor can keep you alive, but at the cost of more damage is just not worth it in my opinion, so that's the way that I went. Now, for the 5th perk, that brings us into some of the other 6 perk options. I would not recommend this weapon without crit explosion. Even the stacking crit rating isn't going to be huge because you're swinging kind of slow, and Affliction and Slowed and Snared is nice. Affliction is one of the best 6 perks in the entire game right now because it's doing tons of damage and lasts for a while, and that has survived about 7 updates, which is something that leads me to believe that it's going to be staying as strong as it is. So damage to Afflicted isn't that bad for pretty much any weapon in the game, but I still recommend crit explosions. That's what makes this weapon unique and worth talking about. But if you are going to be running Affliction or Slowed and Snared, be sure to match the 6 perk. I don't think damage to Stun, Stagger, or Frozen is ever worth it. And of course, if you are using crit hits or crit rating, I suppose, damage to miss monsters and bosses is what I believe will give you the biggest bang for your buck, because those are the enemies that are going to be surviving most of the damage coming out of this weapon and are definitely going to be giving you the most trouble. But that just about wraps it up for the Sir Hootie. I honestly never thought I'd be discussing this weapon in my entire life. It's always been a mediocre melee, but hey, things change. The crit explosion 6 perk was not something that existed when I originally formed my opinion about this weapon, and I'm glad to see that it's a thing, because pretty much, like I said, every melee that has received this 6 perk has pretty much become instantly usable, and while some are still better than others, it does make it worth using and at least trying out. If you guys want to support the channel, feel free to use code Mista to check out. Subscribe if you're new. Twitch link down below. If you guys want to, see me make these videos live, you could hang out in the streams. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a nice day. All right, this video is going to be a short one. Now, I've been covering a lot of the crit explosion melees on my channel, which are, weapons that, cause an explosion when they crit, and it made a lot of the melees very good. And honestly, this isn't really an exception. The fishing hook is a lot better with that crit explosion, and when that activates can have some pretty good crowd clearing, but we're going to go right into the menu just to show you why this is going to be a short video. In all ways that I can see, other than the Farmer's Glory being a spear and the fishing hook being a scythe, the Farmer's Glory is essentially just a direct upgrade of the fishing hook. It has better damage, a better crit chance. Note, I am using Whiteout Fiona in my support right now, improving the fishing hook even further, and the Farmer's Glory is still doing better. And it has an insignificantly less crit damage. That 25% is not changing much, and then it has a faster swing speed. Impact isn't going to be mattering much, and these are with the exact same perks. So that is why I'm not really going to be going too far into the fishing hook. If you're interested in the perks and the general use case, you can kind of just check out the Farmer's Glory video down below. But if you are hell-bent on using the fishing hook, I can say one thing I learned while getting gameplay, and that in the previous video, I did, or at least on the Farmer's Glory video, I should say, I did kind of knock the whirlwind attack. Now, believe it or not, I do actually learn things very occasionally. The whirlwind attack can crit while it's spinning. Believe it or not, this was news to me. I was surprised to see see that, and with the crit explosion activating during it, I can concede that it is actually somewhat useful sometimes. Is that worth building an entire loadout around? I don't believe so. Do with that information whatever you will, but once again, that's the exact same heavy attack that the Farmer's Glory has. So even furthermore, solidifying the fact that this weapon just has a direct doppelganger. As I'm looking at this, I guess the Farmer's Glory takes batteries, but I don't think that's that serious of an investment. And the fishing hook is, like I said, not useless. If you use the loadout that I've got on screen, it's not that bad. It works. You know, it'll do things. It'll kill the enemies, but crit explosion is definitely saving this weapon, and that's kind of all I'm going to say about this. I will say something to plug a little bit more. Now, this is a video that I'm kind of happy is short because I'm making it to complete a set, meaning if you go to the event schematics and the pirate weapons, I have a video on every single one of these. Now, if I was super outgoing in editing, I would have popped all these on screen, but they'll be linked down below. Or something I'm working on in the future is going to be a video with all of these videos being the best perks for the entire pirate weapon set in one single video, which is funny that I'm plugging this because if you're watching this within that video, this will, being the last one that I've uploaded, technically be the outro to that video. So if you have sat through an entire hour of this, comment down below and let's just say Jack's Revenge and Corsair is a great combo, exclamation point, and then it needs to be a winky face so that everybody down below in the comments knows what you mean. Thank you guys for sitting through this. This has been an extremely long video, unless you're watching this as I'm recording this, because then, you know, I'm recording like 2 videos right now, and it's kind of cool. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys want to support the channel and see more of these, you guys can use code Mista at your checkout. I really do appreciate it. Twitch link down below where I get a lot of this gameplay, hang out with you guys in chat. Subscribe if you're brand new, and I'll see you guys in the next one. And then